Yes. Okay. Thanks, Chris. Do we have all the jurors? We're missing two. Okay, thanks.
one second. State of Wisconsin versus Michael Mattioli, 20 CF 1991, appearances.
Paul Tiffin, appearing for the state.
Craig Powell and Michael Hart, appearing with Michael Mattioli. Good morning, Your Honor.
All right, good morning, everyone. We're back in trial in this matter this morning, and we're continuing with the state's case. I did have a discussion with the attorneys about the schedule today, and we'll be discussing that more as the morning proceeds. Regarding the state's next witness, Mr. Tiffin, you're ready to go?
Yes.
Okay. All right, and defense ready to proceed?
Yes.
Okay, we'll bring in the jury, please. Everyone, please take your seats. So we're back in the middle of the state's case, and before we proceed, members of the jury, I wanted to ask you a question. The fan directly above you is making a very annoying clicking noise off and on. And the problem is we have 4 fans, as you can see, 4 ceiling fans. They're all connected. We can only turn them all off or all on. So if we turn them all off, it will become very warm, probably uncomfortably warm in here. So what I'm wondering is, would you rather deal with the clicking noise or the heat? Just give me a show of hands. Who prefers the clicking noise? Okay, everyone's hands. Okay. All right. Well, it's good. It's unanimous. That's good practice for you. So we'll keep them on. So we'll start with the state, Mr. Tiffin. Morning, Doctor. The Madam Clerk will swear you in.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God, or under the pain or penalty of perjury? Yes, I do. Thank you. You can have a seat there, speak clearly into the microphone, state your name, and spell it for the record.
Dr. Wiesława Tłomak, first name is W-I-E-S-L-A-W-A, last name T-L-O-M-A-K.
Thank you, Doctor. Mr. Tiffin.
Dr. Tolomak, you are a medical doctor, correct?
Yes.
Your current employment is what?
I'm a medical examiner at the Milwaukee County Medical Examiner's Office.
And are you the chief medical examiner or one of a number of medical examiners?
I'm the chief medical examiner.
How long have you been employed as a medical examiner at the Milwaukee County Medical Examiner's Office?
I started working as an assistant medical examiner in August 2006. In 2009, I was appointed Forensic Pathology Fellowship Program Director. In 2010, Deputy Chief Medical Examiner. Last year in September, Interim Chief Medical Examiner, and in March this year, Chief Medical Examiner.
Can you briefly describe your educational history and your work history prior to coming to work for the Milwaukee County Medical Examiner's Office?
I graduated from Medical School of Wrocław, WROCLAW, in Poland. After graduation, I completed a mandatory transitional year and then a residency in pediatrics.
In Poland?
In Poland. I was board certified in pediatrics in Poland. Then I moved to the United States. I certified my diploma. I completed residency in pathology at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque, New Mexico. After my residency, I completed 1 year of a forensic pathology fellowship at the Office of a Medical Investigator in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I completed my fellowship in 2006, and in June 2006, and I started working at the Milwaukee County Medical Examiner's Office in August 2006.
You, as the Chief Medical Examiner, obviously have administrative duties, correct?
That's correct.
But in terms of your work, the substance of your work, and not excluding the administrative duties, a medical examiner's job is what?
A medical examiner is a forensic pathologist, and our job is to determine the cause and manner of death. In many cases, we conduct autopsies, which is post-mortem exam, to determine the cause and manner of death.
An autopsy, explain how an autopsy is conducted. And let me ask you this, an autopsy is basically a medical procedure, correct?
Yes.
Explain how it is conducted.
Autopsy is an exam after death. It consists of an external examination, internal examination, and ancillary tests, which are additional tests that are necessary. External examination is almost like limited physical exam. During external examination, the doctor looks at post-mortem changes and any evidence of natural disease or trauma. Photographs are taken during the external examination. Then the body is opened using Y-shaped incision, and the doctor will be looking at the organs inside the body.
And let me know, a Y-shaped incision, basically a cut in the torso and then down the center of the torso?
Yes.
And then you open up the body cavity?
Yes.
So the body cavity is open, and what is the doctor looking at?
So let me go back. We are using Y-shaped incision, so this upper part of Y is on the chest, and then in the midline of the chest and abdomen, we continue to do this incision. Then the skin is reflected, and we are able to see the chest plate and abdominal organs. When the chest plate is removed, and we are able to see the chest organs and abdominal organs. The doctor will again look at any evidence of trauma or natural disease. Then we collect specimens for additional testing, and after that, all the organs are removed from the body. Each organ is weighed and then examined for any evidence of natural disease or trauma. After autopsy is completed and we receive the results of additional tests, we are able to determine the cause and manner of death.
When a doctor performs an autopsy, what type of documentation is done?
All the autopsy findings are described in autopsy protocol.
What if a doctor who didn't perform the autopsy becomes involved? What information is available to another doctor?
So if the doctor who hasn't performed the autopsy is involved in the case, the doctor will review the whole case file and reach independent opinion regarding to the cause and manner of death.
And a case file would include what sort of information? What types of information?
It depends on the case. In the majority of cases, there will be investigation report, autopsy report, toxicology report, as well as reports of other additional tests. In some cases, there will be medical records, police reports, and other reports.
You are in court this morning regarding the death of Joel Acevedo, correct?
Yes.
Mr. Acevedo died when?
He died on April 25th, 2020.
The autopsy was performed when?
The autopsy was performed on April 28, 2020.
Do you know why there was a 3-day gap between death and when the autopsy was performed?
Yes, I do. Mr. Acevedo was pronounced brain dead on April 25th, 2020, and Versity, which is organ and tissue donation organization, contacted the family regarding organ donation. The family agreed that Joel Acevedo can be an organ donor. The heart procurement occurred on April 27 in the morning, and autopsy was conducted the day after on April 28.
The heart had been removed at that time, correct?
The heart was removed on April 27.
You are not the doctor who performed the autopsy on April 28th, correct?
That's correct.
Who performed the autopsy on April 28th?
Dr. Peterson performed autopsy on April 28.
And who is Dr. Peterson?
Dr. Peterson was the chief medical examiner at the Milwaukee County Medical Examiner's Office.
He no longer works for the Milwaukee County Medical Examiner's Office, is that correct?
Dr. Peterson retired in September 2022.
Is it correct to say that after his retirement, you agreed to look at this case?
I agreed to look at this case. It was in April or beginning of May this year.
Of this year?
This year.
And by looking at the case, what were you doing?
I reviewed the file of the case. So I reviewed investigation report, autopsy report, toxicology report, and some medical records. There were also recordings from 911 call, body videos, cameras.
Your purpose of doing that was what?
To determine the cause and manner of death and reach my opinion in the case.
Do you view your job as simply whether or not you agree with an opinion reached by somebody else? Or did you look at that information to come to your own opinion?
So to answer your first part of the question, I review the case to reach my opinion. I'm an independently practicing forensic pathologist. And anytime I'm asked to review a case in order to testify in court, I review the case. If I need additional information, I request this information, and then I reach my independent opinion.
You testified that one piece of information you looked at was a 911 call. Is that correct?
Yes,
And by looking, you listened to it. Is that correct?
I listened to the 911 call.
Was there anything you heard in the 911 call that you viewed as relevant in reaching an opinion as to cause of death?
Yes,
Can you explain that?
I listened to 911 call, and it provided some information that was very important for this case. At the beginning of the 911 call, I could hear that there is some kind of struggle in the background, and I heard some voices. The voice of most likely Joel Acevedo. I listened to this 911 call for many times, but I could recognize that he was saying something, "Let me go, I will go home." And when the struggle continues in the background, there is some distressed breathing, and when other statements are made, at the end, close to the end of this 911 call, it appears that there is still struggle because someone says, stay down or something similar. I didn't memorize the 911 call. So it was important for me because I measured time of this call. It was about 3 minutes, 3.5 minutes. At the beginning of the call, Joel Acevedo is still talking, and it appears that he was still moving close to the end of this call.
Why did you view that as important or relevant?
Because it gives me time frame. Based on police reports, the 911 call was made at 7:28, and police arrived at the scene at 7:38. During the 911 call, Joel Acevedo is still alive. When the first police officers arrived at the scene, they determined that he is not breathing and his heart is not beating. So everything happened during this time.
With respect to the arrival of the police, you've testified that based upon your review, they arrived at 7:38, correct?
Yes.
Did you watch the body cam recording of the initial responding officer?
Yes, I did.
With respect to that recording, did you see anything that you viewed as relevant in determining a cause of death?
Yes, I did.
Explain.
When I watched the video of the body camera recording, I saw on the video what the first responders saw at the scene. Mr. Acevedo was lying face down on the ground, on the floor. Mr. Mattioli was straddling Joel Acevedo, and Mr. Mattioli's upper body, it almost looked like his whole body was on the upper part of the body of Mr. Acevedo. When the officer asked Mr. Mattioli to get off, I was able to see that Mr. Mattioli left forearm and hand were on the side of Joel Acevedo, head and neck. And when he was getting off, you could see that his right arm was under the neck. And when he got off, Joel Acevedo was unresponsive. His head just fell to the left side. And also, when Mr. Mattioli was trying to handcuff or put his, I should say that he tried to put his hands behind the back, and then was asked to get off, the hands just fell on the floor. And then when the officer checked Joel Acevedo's pulse on the neck, he said that there is no pulse. Joel was put on the back, he wasn't breathing, and police started CPR.
Why did you view what you observed, what you just described, as important and relevant?
Because based on this video and police reports, I could determine that there was a compression to the chest and compression to the neck.
With respect to the neck of Mr. Acevedo, were there any notes or any information in the case file from Dr. Peterson regarding observed injuries to Mr. Acevedo's neck?
So the injuries to the neck were present in medical records, and Dr. Peterson described particular hemorrhages on the face, neck, and chest.
The description of the hemorrhages bleeding?
Hemorrhage is bleeding, and particular hemorrhages are pinpoint bleedings on the skin.
And where were those observed?
So those were observed on the face, neck, and chest. I reviewed Dr. Peterson's report, and in his report he stated that at the time of autopsy there were particular hemorrhages on the face, around the eyes. He also stated in his report that he received photographs taken at the hospital which show numerous particular hemorrhages on the face, neck, and upper chest.
And describe what petechial hemorrhages are.
So petechial hemorrhages are small bleedings in the skin. They almost look like pinpoint bleedings, and they happen when very small blood vessels rupture.
With respect to the neck of Mr. Acevedo, what are the strap muscles?
Strap muscles are the muscles in the anterior neck.
From your review of the file, was there any damage to those?
Dr. Peterson did not describe any injuries in the muscles of the anterior neck.
There's also a bone that occasionally or sometimes is broken or crushed during strangulation, correct?
Yes, there is a spine, and then in the front of the neck there is a hyoid bone, and then there are cartilages of the larynx.
Were any of those bones, based upon your review of the case file, damaged?
No, Dr. Peterson didn't describe any injuries to hyoid bone or cartilages in the larynx.
Does that mean that there was no compression, strangulation of the neck?
No, it does not. And,
Why?
Because in the cases of the neck compression, we can see the spectrum of injuries. We may not see anything, and we may see very severe injuries. It depends how much force was applied, how long was the struggle. In this case, in medical records, as well as on the photographs taken at autopsy, there are petechial hemorrhages on the neck, and there is, it's described in medical records as linear contusion, which was on the right side of the neck.
You earlier described all of the items you reviewed. Can you say to any degree of medical certainty whether or not there was any compression of Mr. Acevedo's neck?
I think that there was compression to Mr. Acevedo's neck, and there was compression to his chest and upper abdomen.
One of the other factors, or one of the other pieces of information you talked about were medical records, correct?
Yes, I reviewed emergency medical services reports and medical records from St. Luke's Hospital.
And what information, if any, did you find in those that you viewed as relevant in determining a cause of death?
So first I reviewed emergency medical services reports, and based on these reports, Mr. Acevedo suffered cardiopulmonary arrest.
So, a heart attack?
No, it's that the heart stopped beating and he wasn't breathing.
How is that cardiopulmonary arrest? Is that different than the label heart attack?
Yes, it is.
Explain that.
A heart attack, it's a description of myocardial infarction. And a myocardial infarction occurs when there is occlusion of blood vessels that supply heart with blood and oxygen, and the heart muscle dies. And cardiac or cardiopulmonary arrest is when the heart stops beating.
Is there a reason, or there are many reasons why a heart may simply stop beating?
There are multiple reasons that the heart can stop beating.
With respect to the medical records, what else, if anything, did you read that you viewed as relevant?
Police started cardiopulmonary resuscitation, and then when medical emergency services arrived at the scene, they continued resuscitation. Based on medical records, he received epinephrine that is used in cardiac arrest at 7:54, and it was the first dose, and then he received the second dose at 7:58. At 8:01, there was heartbeat, and in medical records it also states that he started to breathe on his own, and he was transported to St. Luke's Hospital. He was admitted to the hospital at 8:14. I reviewed records from the emergency department. In the emergency department, his pupils were not reactive. Normally, when you put some light in front of the eyes, the pupils will become more narrow. His pupils did not react. His heart was beating. As a matter of fact, he had tachycardia, which means that his heart rate was faster. It was in 140s, and it was also documented in the electrocardiogram. He was intubated in the emergency room, and the breath sounds in both lungs were equal and were clear. They described these numerous petechial hemorrhages on the face, neck, and upper chest. There is a linear contusion, which is a bruise on the right side on the neck, but it's seen on the diagram, and it is also seen on these photographs that I reviewed. His body temperature was measured, and his body temperature was 97.7 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 36.5 degrees centigrade. They ordered computer tomography of the head, angiogram of the head, and chest X-ray. Computer tomography of the head did not show any evidence of trauma, didn't show any abnormalities. This was done on the 19th. Angiogram of the head and neck did not show any abnormalities in the blood vessels of the neck and head. Chest X-ray showed the endotracheal tube. It showed that the heart is normal size, and it showed that the lungs are clear. Mr. Azevedo was intubated, and it's described in medical records that he had some respirations. Those respirations were not synchronized with ventilator, and that's why he was sedated. Subsequently, he was admitted to the hospital, and additional computer tomography of the head was performed on April 22nd. It was in the early hours of April 22nd, and this computer tomography showed severe hypoxic ischemic changes.
What does that mean?
It means that those are changes that occur in the brain when the brain does not receive enough oxygen and the blood flow to the brain is compromised. The computer tomography of the head also revealed a severe brain edema, which is brain swelling. Subsequently, magnetic resonance imaging was ordered, and it was done also on April 22nd. Magnetic resonance imaging showed severe brain swelling and those hypoxic ischemic changes in the brain. In medical records, there is information that Joel Acevedo stopped breathing on his own, and on April 25th, they conducted brain studies to determine the brain death. They did not did apnea test. There was another test performed to determine the brain death, and on April 25th, he was pronounced brain dead.
During the period of time from Mr. Acevedo's admission to St. Luke's until the 25th, when he was pronounced brain dead, any indication he had regained consciousness?
Based on the records, he did not regain consciousness. He suffered severe brain injury, and despite extensive medical treatment, he had multi-organ failure. His kidneys were failing, his liver was failing, he had respiratory failure.
The brain injury, what type of brain injury had he sustained?
The brain injury was caused by his cardiopulmonary arrest and lack of blood flow and oxygen supply to the brain.
You also testified that a piece of information you utilized were reports from Versity, which is whom?
So Versity is an organ and tissue donation organization.
And what did you read or see in those that you viewed as relevant to determining a cause of death?
Your Honor, I'm going to object. Can we have a sidebar, please?
Yes. Members of the jury, we're going to take a short break, and I'm going to ask the deputy to escort you back into the jury room for a few minutes. Please leave your notebooks in here. Again, you can't talk about the case, remember, while we're on break, but we'll be back on the record shortly.
All right,
Inquiry regarding any records reviewed from City, the organ harvesting transplant outfit, as a matter of a discovery violation. A couple things. So, maybe we should have Dr. Tlomak. Well, we're going to need her here for a minute, so never mind.
Doctor, we're going to ask you to stay on the stand for a few minutes. Could you spell the name of Versity, I believe you said it was?
I believe it'sVersiti.
Thank you.
So as the court has already heard, Dr. Tlomak did not perform the autopsy. She has come in as a replacement witness for Dr. Peterson, given his abrupt departure from the office and this case. Dr. Tlomak did not generate a report. In terms of a 971.23 expert summary, all we received from the state was basically a one-line email from Dr. Tlomak that said she reviewed Dr. Peterson's autopsy and agrees. Basically, that's it. Nothing further. Dr. Peterson's autopsy report and information that was provided has no information from the organ donor outfit. Michael Hart, my partner, and I met with Dr. Tlomak on October 18th. To discuss the case and her findings. There was a discussion about organ removal and transplant process. At that time, Dr. Tlomak told us she didn't know what had happened to the heart and would endeavor to look and find out and get back to us. That was never done. Now, apparently, she has reviewed reports from Versiti. We haven't seen that information. It's not been disclosed to us. So I think, it should have been as a matter of discovery and part of any summary regarding the scope of her testimony under 971.23. So I ask the court to exclude any testimony about that topic. I would reserve the right to request the court for potential curative instruction later, because she has now reviewed apparently information that we were not able to provide to our own expert to inform the work that he did in rendering his own opinions that presents independent but significant issue.
Mr. Tiffin.
Judge, first, this is not a discovery violation. This characterized the state has an obligation to turn over items which are under its control. The medical examiner's office is an independent body. The reports from Versiti, whatever those reports are not in the state's possession. I don't have them. I knew that the doctor had, it was one of her pieces that she relied upon. So there's no discovery violation by any means. It seems from what was said in chambers that the more substance of the complaint was that when they met with Dr. Tlomak, she had indicated that she was uncertain what had happened to the heart. She would attempt to get some reports, and I don't know if she has them. I don't know, but their objection is they don't have them. So It's not a discovery violation. It's not a statutory violation under the rules of discovery under 971.23. But it appears to be that Dr. Tolomek said she would get something to them, and she didn't. I don't think it's any basis to exclude her testimony. It's relevant. They can cross-examine her on that information. Her testimony will be provided here. I know that the experts, if she has them, I don't know if she has them here. I don't know what exists. They can turn them over. They can be provided to the defendant's experts who are not scheduled to testify till tomorrow. That's the state's position. And if the court wants to inquire with respect to Dr. Tolomek and discussions, or the defense wants to question her regarding the meeting they had with her, which I was not part of, that's fine by the state.
Doctor, do you have documents from Versity?
So I have the documents that the heart was taken for transplant. I was trying to obtain information what happened to the heart, and when I contacted Versity, in general, I was told that it will be violation of personal information, and I cannot receive information, who was the recipient of this heart, and I don't know, how the person is doing. The only thing I know that it was the permission was given to take organs for transplant, not for research. This is the only information that I have. And I apologize that I didn't communicate it, but I didn't have answer to your questions.
Mr. Powell? You have,
Sure. But that information, that the heart was in fact transplanted and not used for valves, for example, only, that was information you did not have when we met. Is that true?
It's that the only, and again, this information is in medical records. When you request all medical records, you also receive records from Versity. They are part of medical records. And in this medical records, there was information that the heart was removed on April 27th, and that it was for transplant. So they have like different options that are discussed with the families. The heart can be, when the person, the brain is dead, but the heart is still beating, the heart can be removed for transplant and transplanted to another person. If the heart is not used for transplant, it could be used for research. However, in this case, it was permission was given to take the heart for transplant only, not for research. And then heart for valves is taken after the person died. But in this situation, Versity will send the heart to cardiac pathologist, and the office will receive cardiac pathology report.
And you have that? The cardiac pathology report?
If the heart was used for transplant, you don't have cardiac pathology report because this heart was transplanted to another person.
And so my question, I guess, is do you have confirmation it was transplanted to another person?
I cannot receive this information.
So we don't know whether it was actually transplanted?
This is something that only Versity can answer, and I try to obtain this information, and I was told that it will be violation of personal information.
Okay. Understood. Thank you.
All right. Just a couple. The information regarding Versity in the heart, that was in the medical records from St. Luke's, correct?
Those were medical records. So anytime I request medical records, and I request all medical records. If there is organ donation, I receive this information as well, because before organ donation, there are multiple studies performed in the hospital. And in this case, they did echocardiogram, which in general showed what is the state of the heart. I'm not the one who makes decision if the organ can be used for transplant. I also don't know the criteria when organ can be used for transplant or not. Those questions can be addressed to transplant team.
So all you know is that Mr. Acevedo's heart was taken for transplant, but after that, you don't know what happened. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That's all I wanted to ask.
Okay, all right, thank you. Attorneys, do you want to repeat at chambers again briefly?
Sure.
Yes, that's correct.
But after that, nobody knows, you don't know what happened, correct?
I don't.
When you also agreed, and when you took this case over, for lack of a better label, you did something, a label called histology, correct?
Yes, I did.
And that's Hystology, is that correct?
Yes.
What is histology?
So what I did, I wanted to perform microscopic examination of the tissue that was retained after autopsy.
And what, from the case file, what tissue was maintained after the autopsy?
So if I could explain first what we do with tissue that is collected during the autopsy. When we do autopsy, we examine all the organs, and all the organs after autopsy are returned back to the body. However, we take small sections of some organs or abnormalities and put them in a jar with formalin, which is a fixative solution, and we keep those sections in cases for 3 years. When I was appointed the interim chief medical examiner, I made a decision that in any case that the death could be homicide, we keep those sections for 5 years. When I was asked to review this case, I reviewed the case, and I wanted to reach my independent conclusion. I'm not saying or stating what Dr. Peterson did. I looked at the case like it was my case. I couldn't perform autopsy, so I had to rely on the report, on the photographs. Because Dr. Peterson did not do histology, I wanted to have it as part of my review. So I submitted the tissue that was in this stock jar for microscopic examination. There was tissue from the brain, from the lungs, from the liver, kidneys, and there were also sections of tissue with a lot of bleeding. I couldn't determine where this tissue was collected from, but I submitted everything for microscopic examination.
Histology, essentially a label that involves a microscopic examination. Is that accurate?
Yes, this is, I take a section of the organ, send it to the lab, and then I receive histology slide, and I look at the histology slide. So for me, it's I do gross examination of the organ. I see how the organ looks. I see if there are any abnormalities. And many times I'm able to determine based on gross examination what the abnormality is. But in my practice, I always want to have microscopic examination to support my diagnosis. And that's why I did histology in this case.
You did a microscopic examination of sections of Mr. Acevedo's brain. Is that correct?
Yes.
Did you see anything in looking at the microscopic slides that you viewed as relevant to determining a cause of death?
Yes, sections of brain tissue revealed what is called eosinophilic degeneration of neurons. And
What does that mean?
so eosinophilic degeneration of neurons is the change in the neurons that occur due to a lack of oxygen. And in general, on microscopic examination, the neurons are red, and the nucleus is shrink and looks almost like a raisin. So this supports anoxic encephalopathy, which is brain damage due to lack of oxygen.
You also examined microscopic slides of section of the lungs for Mr. Acevedo. Is that correct?
Yes, I did.
And what, if anything, did you observe that you viewed as relevant in determining a cause of death?
So I took sections of the lungs and submitted them for microscopic examination. I also did additional stain on those lung sections, which is called Movat stain. On microscopic examination, I saw areas of atelectasis, which is almost a collapsed lung, which is consistent with clinical findings, but he was on ventilator and he wasn't breathing on his own. So it's something that it's expected. In addition, I wanted to know and I wanted to see if there are any changes in the lungs that would be due to asthma. Joel Acevedo had history of asthma. I saw in a few airways there was mucus, and I was able to see it on H&E slides, which are like original slides, as well as on this Movat stain, because in Movat stain the mucus is a different color. I did not see changes that I normally see in people with asthma. So I didn't see like thickening of basement membrane. I did not see inflammation, including eosinophils, which is characteristic to asthma. It doesn't rule out that he didn't have asthma. He simply didn't develop, I didn't see these changes in those sections. This diagnosis was made clinically, and based on the records I reviewed, he was diagnosed with asthma, he had exacerbations of asthma, and during these exacerbations, he needed treatment.
With respect to what you just testified to about the asthma, he suffered from that, correct?
He was diagnosed with asthma.
Was that diagnosis of relevance to you in determining a cause of death?
Yes, because the fact that he had asthma made him more vulnerable.
With respect to the microscopic examination of slides prepared from the liver, what, if anything, did you observe that you viewed as relevant?
So I don't think that the microscopic examination of the liver was relevant to the cause of death. He had some fatty changes in the liver, and when I was reviewing medical records, there was information that he had these fatty changes before, and they were not alcohol related. But this was a statement in medical records.
With respect to the kidney in the microscopic examination of slides prepared from the kidney, anything observed of relevance?
I couldn't do a complete microscopic examination of the kidneys because the tissue was autolyzed, so there was post-mortem change that hindered further examination.
And why would that be?
So in general, when the person dies, there will be post-mortem change, which can be caused either by bacteria or by autolysis, which is post-mortem process. And in those cases, the changes, the post-mortem changes, don't allow me to conduct examination. And in his case, he had kidney insufficiency that was diagnosed clinically. So those changes due to acute renal failure and changes due to autolysis overlap, so I couldn't make any determination.
You had viewed slides from one other part of his body, is that correct?
That's correct. So there were sections in the stock jar of tissue, and this tissue looked hemorrhagic, so there was blood in it. There was some fibrous tissue. I submitted all this tissue for microscopic examination, and under microscope, I was able to see fat, fibrous tissue, blood, and fat necrosis. So it was dead fat, but it occurred before the person died. There was no tissue from any organs that would allow me to determine that this was taken from this organ.
You talked about Mr. Acevedo having asthma. When you reviewed the case file, when the body cavity was opened, did you see, either through pictures or notes, did Mr. Acevedo suffer from any type of physical growth abnormality inside his body cavity?
So I did not conduct this autopsy. I reviewed the report and I reviewed the photographs that were taken at autopsy. And based on autopsy report, he had purulent exudate, which is almost like pus lining the main bronchi. And this was, Dr. Peterson described this purulent exudate in both bronchi.
And what does that mean?
So it happens commonly when the person is on ventilator, and I've seen it in cases that I conducted autopsy. In general, despite the treatment, the person can develop a bronchitis and can develop pneumonia on ventilator.
Anything else inside the body cavity that you observed either on the pictures or the notes that you viewed as relevant? So
Dr. Peterson described in the autopsy report that there were hemorrhagic changes in the pancreas. He described multiple small abscesses, which is a collection of pus, in and around the pancreas. I looked at the photographs, the autopsy photographs, and what I saw on autopsy photographs was a lot of hemorrhage around the pancreas, in the pancreas. There are those small, I cannot tell if those were abscesses or fat necrosis around the pancreas.
And the pancreas is where?
The pancreas is, in general, it's in the abdomen, it's in the upper abdomen, and when you palpate your sternum, so there are ribs on both sides, and there is like sternum in the middle. When there's like end of the sternum, deep inside the abdomen, there is pancreas, and it extends to the left side. It's like an organ, but it's almost kind of a linear, extends to the left side. Those hemorrhages were present in the part of the pancreas that is in front of the spine. I did not have any sections of the pancreas, so I cannot tell if there are any disease or injury based on video that was obtained from the body camera of the first responding officer, based on autopsy photographs and Dr. Peterson report. I think that I can only provide differential diagnosis, what I think happened to the pancreas. Dr. Peterson called it hemorrhagic pancreatitis. I think that it could be. I cannot completely rule it out.
And what is that?
It's acute infection of the pancreas with bleeding, but it also could be due to vigorous resuscitation. Just watching those videos, the resuscitation was very vigorous, and this is something that I've seen in people who were resuscitated. And in addition, when I reviewed medical records, on April, I think it was April 25th, the test was ordered for lipase and amylase, and those values are usually elevated in acute pancreatitis. However, in this case, both values were within normal limit.
The asthma is a natural condition, disease, correct?
Yes.
Based upon the information you reviewed, medical records, Mr. Acevedo suffer from other natural diseases or conditions that you viewed as relevant in determining a cause of death.
Based on medical records, he suffered from immune deficiency.
And what does that mean?
So it means that his immune system, there are different types of immune deficiency. Based on medical records, he suffered from, it's called X-linked agammaglobulinemia. And this is the condition in which like the body, the cells that are responsible for immune response were in a way defected because they did not mature to B cells that produce antibodies, which are very important in all type of infections. I don't think that this is relevant to his cause of death. Yes, he suffered from immune deficiency, but when he was admitted to the hospital, he didn't have any evidence of infection. As a matter of fact, the blood cultures were done twice, and both times there was no growth, there was no infection. The first day when he was admitted to the hospital, they did chest x-ray and both lungs were clear. He didn't have any evidence of pneumonia or other infection. He didn't have anything that would even indicate, and it wasn't indicated in medical records, that the findings were consistent with asthma exacerbation.
As part of the autopsy procedure, are toxicology screens tests done?
The toxicology is done in almost every case that medical examiner office takes jurisdiction. Toxicology is also done in the hospitals when the person is admitted to the hospital. Based on medical records, urine drug screen was performed on urine collected on April 19th. Urine drug screen was positive for cannabinoids, which is marijuana is an example of cannabinoid. Urine drug screen was also positive for cocaine and cocaine metabolites, and it was positive for ethanol, which is an alcohol.
Those positive tests were from records in the hospital?
Those tests were from the hospital records, and they were done on the urine.
Did the medical examiner's office itself perform toxicology tests?
Yes, and I would like to explain the toxicology findings, but could I have a toxicology report in front of me?
Exhibit 14, that's the toxicology report, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Show you exhibit 14, which I'm going to put on the monitor in a moment. This, what you have here, is a copy of 14, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
What is on the monitor, if you can look, is a one-page toxicology report, correct?
That's correct.
At the top, it talks about antemortem specimens. That's pre-death, is that correct?
Yes, so the most upper part of the report contains some demographic information. So the medical examiner's case number, the name of the decedent, which is Acevedo Joel A., and then the pathologist, the name of the pathologist who conducted the autopsy, and the date of the toxicology report, which in this case is May 12, 2020.
There's a section AM serum 435666.
So at the top of the report, you see that which specimens were collected, and in this section, it says antemortem specimens, and that those specimens were received from Aurora St. Luke's Medical Center, and our toxicology laboratory received it on April 27, 2020. What Mr. Tiffin is referring to are those AM serum, and there is a number, and this number 435,666. This is the number of the specimen in our toxicology laboratory, as well as the other number 435667.
The description of the serum 435666 and 435667 reports that it was collected on an unknown date at an unknown time for both of them, correct?
That's correct.
Did you later provide information that those two samples were actually collected on the 19th of April, the 435-666 at 16:10 hours, and the other sample collected at 10:02, which would be 10:02 in the morning, and 16 would be 4:10.
So originally, when I reviewed the case, I did not know that the exact time when the specimens were collected, it's known. However, this week, I received the information that Mr. Tiffin just provided, that the specimen with the end 666 was collected around 4 p.m. and the specimen 667 was collected around 10 a.m. On the day that Joe Acevedo was admitted to the hospital.
What is vitreous, and how is that different from AM serum?
So vitreous is a fluid in the eye, and it was collected at Autopsy on April 27, 2020. Serum is from the blood, so normally blood is collected and it's put in the tubes. And there are different type of tubes, so there are tubes that don't have any additional substance, and then there are some tubes that have like additional substance that, for example, will cause blood to clot, or there will be some chemicals added to the tube that stops like certain specimens for degrading or changing. What serum is when the blood is collected and then there is a substance that will cause coagulation of blood is added to the tube, and to some tube it's not added, and then the blood is spinned and the fluid that is on so the cells and the fluid will be separated, and this fluid is collected. And it's serum is when there is no coagulation factors, and plasma, it's also fluid, but it contains those coagulation factors.
With respect to this report, the serum that was collected from Mr. Acevedo at about 10 in the morning on April 19th was screened for drugs, alcohol, etc., correct?
So with the toxicology lab, there is toxicology lab at the Milwaukee County Medical Examiner's Office. We have very accurate and sensitive instruments. The procedure of toxicology testing consists of 2 stages. The first one is screening. And for screening, we use instrument that is described here as LCMS TOF. This is a very sensitive instrument, and when the specimen is run through this instrument, we will receive information about medications, drugs of abuse, and metabolites, and we receive a long list in some cases of everything that the person took, including like over-the-counter medications. When the concentration of the drug is 1 nanogram per milliliter, it will show on the screening that it's indicated. When the drug is indicated, the lab has to do additional tests. They have to confirm on a different instrument, and in this case, they use HSGC and LCM SMS instrument to confirm that this drug is present in the system, is present in the blood, and they also have to determine what is the concentration. For quantitative results and confirmation, the instruments have a limit of detection 5 nanograms per milliliter. So for screening is 1 nanogram per milliliter, for confirmation is 5 nanograms per milliliter.
With respect to Mr. Acevedo, the screening of the serum collected at roughly 10 a.m. showed carboxy, THC, gluconoride.
Yes, so if I could explain the screening results. So the screening was positive for carboxy THC glucuronide,
Which is what?
which is cocaine which is cannabinoid marijuana metabolite, but it's not active. And it says that it's indicated. So it wasn't confirmed. It's very likely that it was in the blood, however, it wasn't confirmed. There was cotinine, which is from nicotine. When someone smokes cigarettes, nicotine will be metabolized to cotinine. It's also indicated. There is esgonine methyl ester, which abbreviation is EME, which is also indicated. This was not confirmed. And then there is levamisole tetramycol, which is contamination of cocaine. We see it like in many cases when people consume cocaine. They will be also positive for levamisole tetramycol. This is something that is not used in clinical treatments. It's used for treating parasitic infections, but it's not FDA approved in people. What we don't see in the screening test is benzoyl esgonine, which we commonly use abbreviation BE, because this was also indicated, and they did confirmation test and confirmed what was the concentration of benzoyl esgonine.
What is that?
Benzoyl esgonine is cocaine. It's cocaine metabolite. Cocaine, when consumed, will be metabolized very fast in the body to benzoyl esgonine and esgonine methyl ester. And if I could explain the problems with toxicology finding in this case.
If there's a problem, please explain.
So there's not a problem with the results. The problem that I faced reviewing this case was interpretation of these results.
What do you mean by that?
So Mr. Tiffin forwarded me information that the specimens, that the end is 7, was collected around 10 a.m. on the day that Mr. Acevedo was admitted to the hospital. So the screening was done on the oldest specimen. The quantitative results, especially alcohol and benzoyl esgonine, which is cocaine metabolite, were done on the specimen that was collected at 4 o'clock. So we have 6 hours difference. But the problem is that cocaine is not stable in the tube. Both specimens were collected on April 19th. The lab received them on April 27th. We have 8-day difference. During that time, it is very possible that it is possible that cocaine was present in the tube, but because of the changes that occur in the tube, and the process is called hydrolysis. There is hydrolysis of cocaine to benzoyl esgonine. So it's possible that there was cocaine, but because of the way it was stored in the tube, we don't see it cocaine. I also cannot interpret this benzyl esgonine concentration. This concentration could either increase or even decrease in the tube. The only thing I can say based on this report is that Mr. Acevedo used cocaine. I cannot tell when he used cocaine. I cannot tell how many times he used cocaine. I cannot tell if he had cocaine at the time of the incident. I can only say that he used cocaine. And the other problem with the other important information about cocaine is that we have to be very careful when we determine that cocaine was contributory factor to death or caused death, because there is no minimum fatal concentration of cocaine, and there is no correlation between concentration of cocaine and toxic effects cocaine has on a person.
I believe you've described and gone into detail about all of the information you use to reach an opinion regarding cause of death. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Cause of death, is that another way of saying the reason a person died?
Yes.
Based upon everything you looked at, did you come to an opinion as to the cause of death of Mr. Acevedo?
Yes.
And what is your opinion?
In my opinion, the cause of death was anoxic encephalopathy due to traumatic asphyxia during violent struggle.
Anoxic encephalopathy means what?
Anoxic encephalopathy means severe brain damage that was caused by a lack of oxygen.
And traumatic asphyxia means what?
Let me start with asphyxia. Asphyxia is a condition during which the cells cannot receive oxygen or cannot utilize oxygen. A traumatic asphyxia is a type of asphyxia during which the person is unable to breathe, or there is a compression of the neck that makes blood flow to the brain impossible or decreased.
Based upon everything you looked at, do you have, and did you reach an opinion as to what the traumatic asphyxia that Mr. Acevedo suffered was?
So, based on everything I reviewed, Mr. Acevedo chest and upper abdomen were compressed, and there was also compression to the neck. There is this linear contusion that is described in medical records, and I was able to see it myself on the photographs that were taken at the hospital. This is a linear contusion on the right side of the neck, and there are numerous petechial hemorrhages on the face, on the neck, upper chest. I also saw those petechial hemorrhages on the upper arms. Those petechial hemorrhages could be due to compression of the chest as well as compression of the neck.
Medical examiners also, as part of their job, try to define or label, put a label on the manner of death. Is that correct?
Yes.
What is, for your job, what does manner of death mean?
So, manner of death was actually added to death certificates in 1910 by the public health officials. The reason it was added to the death certificate was to clarify the type of injuries and the circumstances of death. So from my point of view, the manner of death describes circumstances, describes what happened to the person. The cause of death describes why the person died, what was the cause of death, and the manner of death describes circumstances.
In your field, I believe there are 5 categories of manner of death.
So in Wisconsin, there are 5 categories of manner of death. The death is natural if the person dies of a natural disease or age. Accidental if the person dies of injury or poisoning or both, but is not intentional and is unpredictable to the time and place. It's unforeseen, for example, motor vehicle accident. Suicide if the death is from self-inflicted act. It could be either injury or poisoning with the intent to die. So, for example, hanging. Homicide if the death is due to volitional act of another person meant to cause harm, injury, fear, or death. From medical point of view, I do not look at intention. Some injuries can be potentially harmful. Some people describe, some forensic pathologists described homicide as a death at the hands of another. And then the last one is undetermined. And there are 2 scenarios when I use the manner of death. I certified the manner of death as undetermined. The first one is if I don't have enough information to determine what happened to the person. For example, if there are skeletal remains, I don't know what happened. I will certify it as undetermined. And then the other one is when there are two possible manners of death. So, for example, if someone, let's say, uses drugs and the person is found dead and there are drugs in the system, but also this person has history of suicide attempts. I cannot tell if the person died because accidentally overdosed or the person did it on purpose and took more drugs to die. So in this situation, I will determine that the manner of death is best certified as undetermined.
With respect to Mr. Acevedo, did you reach an opinion as to manner of death?
Yes, I did.
Which was what?
I would certify this death as homicide.
And for you, does that mean death at the hands of another?
Yes.
Who is Dr. Jeffrey Jensen?
Dr. Jeffrey Jensen is a forensic pathologist. As a matter of fact, Dr. Jensen was the chief medical examiner in the Milwaukee County Medical Examiner's Office, and Dr. Jensen hired me in 2006.
You are aware that Dr. Jensen, on behalf of Mr. Mattioli, looked at this case, correct?
That's correct. I was made aware about Dr. Jensen's review of the case after I reviewed the case.
Did you consider Dr. Jensen's review of the case prior to reaching an opinion as to cause of death?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
You are aware that Dr. Jensen reviewed the case and is providing information about his opinions, correct?
Yes, after I reviewed the case.
So when you reached an opinion as to cause of death, had you, prior to doing so, considered information from Dr. Jensen?
No, I did not.
As to manner of death, had you, at the time you reached an opinion as to manner of death, had you considered and looked at Dr. Jensen's views?
I don't remember exactly when I received Dr. Jensen's report, but I reviewed it.
You've reviewed it prior to today, is that correct?
Yes.
Is it accurate to say that he has reached a different opinion as to cause of death?
Yes, he did.
And what is his opinion?
I did not memorize it, but his opinion was that Mr. Acevedo died from cardiac arrest during, I think, physical restraint, and so this was the cause of death determination.
Did that information, and does that information cause you to change your opinion?
No.
Why?
As I said, I'm independent forensic pathologist. When I conduct autopsies or I'm asked to review the case or testify in the case instead of my colleagues who either left for a different position, retired, or in a few cases who died, I review the case, I treat it as my own case, and I, based on my opinion on the information that I review. And if I don't have enough information, then I ask for additional information, and I do additional things like in this case, I did this microscopic exam.
Could Mr. Acevedo's death simply have been the result of cardiac arrest, in your opinion?
We have to look at the whole case. We have to review what happened before the incident, what happened during the incident, and then what happened after incident. In this case, he suffered cardiac arrest. There was no heartbeat, and I don't argue that he suffered cardiac arrest, but he was also not breathing. So there is cardiopulmonary arrest. The person is not breathing, the heart is not beating, the person is not responding. He was resuscitated. However, during this incident, the damage to the brain was done, and it's seen in medical records. When they did CT scans, those angiograms and magnetic resonance imaging, there is progression of the brain injury. So he died of he died of the condition that caused his cardiopulmonary arrest. And that's why I would call it anoxic encephalopathy, because this was very severe injury. He couldn't recover from it. And this injury was caused by traumatic asphyxia that resulted in this injury. And cardiac arrest, cardiopulmonary arrest, it was, part of the sequence of what happened to Joel Acevedo.
I have no other questions.
Thank you. Mr. Hart or Mr. Powell?
Leave me here 1 second, please.
Mr. Powell.
Good morning, Dr. Tomac.
Good morning.
So Mr. Tiffin was just asking you about Dr. Jensen, correct?
Yes.
And you know him, right, obviously?
I worked with Dr. Jensen for 2 years before he retired.
And what you've testified to today is your opinion in your medical judgment, correct?
That's why, I'm sorry. Yes, it was my opinion.
Right. And reasonable pathologists can disagree about a cause of death or an outcome. You would agree with that, correct?
That's correct.
So I want to talk to you a little bit about your conclusions regarding traumatic asphyxia. Now, you're familiar with a text called Forensic Pathology by an author, Vincent and Dominic DeMaio, is that right?
That's correct.
And that is a text that is frequently utilized by forensic pathologists in the field?
That's correct. And the edition that you have is an older edition. There is a newer one.
All right, let's talk about categories of asphyxia, okay? You would agree that Drs. DeMaio discussed 3 categories of asphyxia.
Yes.
Those being mechanical asphyxia.
Well, he describes not 3 major categories. And he divides those categories into the one that there is obstruction of the airways, the one, and it will be external airways, so for example, nose and mouth.
Let me ask you a couple of questions here. So he breaks those down, correct? And
he breaks it down, yes.
Covering the nose and mouth, as you were just discussing, is something we refer to as smothering, right?
And so he calls it suffocation.
Okay. And traumatic asphyxia he refers to as compression of the chest occurs when a heavy weight presses down on an individual's chest or upper abdomen, correct?
That's correct. In general, it's either mechanical or traumatic asphyxia when there is compression of the chest or neck, or both.
Well, Doctors DeMaio talk about strangulation as compression of the neck that occludes blood flow to and from the brain or the airways, correct?
That's correct. It's strangulation, which includes hanging, manual strangulation, and ligature strangulation.
Or a chokehold, right? That's can be manual strangulation per Dr. DeMaio.
Well, I cannot speak for Dr. DeMaio.
Okay. But his text, you would agree that if his text said so, that's an authoritative source from your point of view?
Well, there are other textbooks.
Okay. So you would agree with me that chokehold or strangulation indicates, or certain types of petechiae are indicated with that type of compression or asphyxia, correct?
Could you repeat the question?
Sure. When you're dealing with compression of the neck or asphyxia related to the neck, what Dr. DeMaio and what you normally see is petechiae in the conjunctivae and the sclerae. That's the most common area that they appear, correct?
Well, this is what Dr. DeMaio described.
Correct.
And Dr. DeMaio textbook is not the only forensic pathology textbook. What Dr. DeMaio says in his textbook is that you can see petechial hemorrhages, and he describes it that you can see them in the eyes, on the sclera conjunctiva. You can see them.
Let me stop you there. The sclera is the white of the eye, correct?
Yes.
The conjunctivae is the inner eyelids of the eye, right?
It's in general, everything in the eye is covered by conjunctiva. Okay. But Dr. DeMaio also says that those petechial hemorrhages are non-specific findings. And when you interpret those petechial hemorrhages, you have to correlate it with circumstances of death.
And the circumstances of death that you would correlate it are things that you learned from police reports, correct?
Yes.
Body cameras, correct?
Yes.
The 911 call you said you listened to, correct?
That's correct.
And what witnesses who were there described what happened, correct?
That's correct.
And so part of what you looked at when you came to your conclusion about, I think you said, your words were, it could be compression of the neck, was those things we just described, right?
Yes.
And another thing that was described was an investigation report that is done by your medical examiner's office, correct?
Investigation report that is done by a medical examiner's office. It's a report that documents information that was provided to the office when the case was reported to us and after. Okay,
and so what that report said, you reviewed that report when you looked at this file, correct?
Yes, I did.
And that report said that an officer on the scene said he observed Mr. Acevedo being held in a chokehold, right?
This was what is written in the report, and this is what was reported to us.
Right, so that's something you took into consideration, correct?
Well, as I said, this investigation report is written when the case is reported to us, and this information is provided to our investigators by reporting person.
I understand. My question, though, is did you consider it?
I read the report, but to consider it, I needed additional information. I cannot rely on this report because this report is in general hearsay.
Okay, so you don't rely on it, you look for other things, right?
I look for confirmation from the resources, like in this case, 911 call.
Let me stop you there, the 911 call, okay? You've told us that when it happens, you've listened to it many times, you said, right?
Yes, I did.
All right, you hear in your description a struggle happening in the background that lasts the entire call, correct?
Yes.
And you obviously can't see what's going on in the background, right?
That's correct.
And when you noted before that part of your finding was anoxic encephalopathy due to traumatic asphyxia through violent struggle, you don't know what that violent struggle looked like if you're referring to what's happening in the 911 call, correct?
No, I reached my conclusion based on reviewing everything.
Right.
The 911 call was important for me because it gave me a time frame. I could hear people in this room. I think it was kitchen. I could hear people in the background. I could hear Joel Acevedo saying that he wants to leave. And I'm not saying exact words, I didn't memorize it. And what was important for me was hearing when the sentences made, lay down. So it means that at that time, he was still moving.
Fair enough. And you know from your review that before the 911 call was made, that Mr. Acevedo had lashed out and violently struck and assaulted someone else in the house.
That's correct.
And you knew that he was fighting or wrestling with Mr. Mattioli, correct?
Yes.
All right. And you knew that based on your other review of the records, that Mr. Acevedo had asthmatic conditions in his lungs, correct?
Yes.
And did you review records from Mr. Acevedo's health care from before April 19th of 2020?
So I received probably about 1,600 pages of medical records. I did not review all 1,600 pages. I looked at the records, like the most recent records, and those records indicated that he had history of asthma, he had history of asthma exacerbation, for which he was seeking medical care, and he also had this immune deficiency for which he was receiving gamma globulin injections.
In reviewing those records of his asthmatic exacerbations, did you also look at his multiple hospitalizations where he had forced exhalatory volume readings done? His lung functions were tested.
Well, I don't practice clinical medicine anymore, so this is outside my area of expertise.
Okay, you're not a pulmonologist?
No, I'm not.
Not a toxicologist for that matter either, right?
Well, part of my training as a forensic pathologist is toxicology.
All right, let's get back to what you looked at when you came to your opinion. We've talked about the 911 call. Let's talk about the body camera, okay? You looked at that, right?
Yes, I did.
And you would agree with me that you can see Mr. Mattioli on Mr. Acevedo's back, correct?
Yes.
And you can see that Mr. Mattioli's knees are on the floor, correct?
Yes.
And you can see that Mr. Mattioli's arms are also on the floor in front of Mr. Acevedo when he gets up.
Well, so what I saw was when I was able to see that the left forearm is parallel to the head and neck, that he was holding the head, and then that the right arm was under the neck.
What the body camera doesn't show you, if those positions are accurate, is whether Mr. Mattioli is applying any pressure to Mr. Acevedo's neck at that time. True?
Based on this video, I cannot tell if there was pressure applied.
Right.
The only person who could tell how much pressure was applied would be Joel Acevedo.
Or Mr. Mattioli.
Well, I would argue.
Your Honor,
Folks, you cannot react to testimony.
Your Honor,
Can be no verbal, no displays. Okay, Mr.
sidebar, please.
Yes. So folks in the gallery, there have been a couple of moments earlier this morning where I heard comments being made during testimony. Just now there was a significant outburst. A number of people expressed agreement or disagreement with something that was said during this trial. You cannot react to testimony in any way. If I see one more reaction or hear one more reaction, that person will be ordered out of the courtroom, and that person will not be allowed to return for any portion of this trial. I want to make sure everyone understands that. That includes members of the public and members of any families who are present. So we're going to continue with testimony. Mr. Powell.
I believe where we were, Dr. Tzlomak, is that Mr. Mattioli would know how much pressure or whether he applied any pressure to Mr. Acevedo's neck.
Yes, and I would argue, because, and I should probably clarify, but both in the case of Mr. Acevedo and Mr. Mattioli, this would be subjective. What I'm looking at when I'm reviewing the case and trying to determine, it's at the findings and the fact that there was this linear contusion on the right side of the neck, and there were numerous petechial hemorrhages, indicates to me that the force applied to the neck was big enough that it caused compression of the veins in the neck, and it could, it also, caused compression of the arteries. It requires 4.4 pounds of force to apply to the neck to close jugular veins. Those are main blood vessels, veins in the neck. However, blood will still flow to the brain, but it cannot return to the heart. It requires 10 pounds to occlude carotid arteries. Those are like arteries, but if you put your hand on the side to the neck, you can feel pulse. However, blood still flows through vertebral arteries that are in the back of the neck. Blood will flow to the brain, but it cannot come back to the heart. And these small blood vessels, they become full of blood, and then they will rupture. And then we see those petechial hemorrhages.
Now, Dr. Peterson's autopsy report that you reviewed, correct?
Yes.
He notes evidence of injury. He did not note any petechial hemorrhages in the conjunctivae or sclerae on his autopsy protocol, did he?
He did not. However, Dr. Peterson conducted this autopsy on April 28. The incident occurred on April 19th, so autopsy was done 9 days after. When I reviewed photographs that were taken at the hospital, there are numerous petechial hemorrhages on the face, neck, chest, and upper extremities.
Let me stop you there.
And let me just finish my sentence. There are pictures taken of the eyes. However, with the right eye, the picture is taken from the side. The upper and lower eyelids are not pulled out, and I cannot see if there are any petechial hemorrhages. I don't see it, but it's not complete exam. Photograph. In the left eye, however, there are few petechial hemorrhages.
Two or a few?
A few, I said.
How many?
A few. I could bring those photographs.
You did not?
I'm sorry?
You did not bring them?
I have them.
Okay. So a few, keep going.
A few petechial hemorrhages in the eye. However, again, there is a photograph taken of the sclera and lower eyelid. There is no photograph of the upper eyelid. So I cannot make any statement how many petechial hemorrhages are in the eyes. In regards to Dr. Peterson's report, As I said, the photographs were taken on April 19th. Joel Acevedo autopsy was conducted on April 28th. He was pronounced dead on April 25th. The body heals, and it's not uncommon that something that was seen at the time of admission to the hospital, it's not seen anymore at autopsy.
All right, so the photographs you're describing as apparently inadequate to look at the eyeballs or eyes and see if there's petechiae there. The bottom line is, based on what you see in the photographs you have, you can't say that there's petechiae present there, right?
No, you misunderstood me. I didn't say that the photographs are inadequate. I said that they provide limited information. There are a few petechial hemorrhages in the left eye. I cannot tell if there are more petechial hemorrhages in the right eye, and I cannot tell if there are more petechial hemorrhages on the conjunctiva of the upper eyelid of the left eye.
And so you can't tell if there are not either.
No, they are. There are petechial hemorrhages that I see on the photograph.
Right, in the spots that aren't shown, as you described, the photographs don't show the underside of certain parts of the eye. Am I misunderstanding you?
Yes, you do. So the photographs were taken in the hospital.
Understood.
And I have the photographs with me. I reviewed those photographs. I have photographs with me. When the photograph of the right eye showed pupil, iris, which is the central part of the eye, and white part of the eye, which is sclera. And I don't see on this photograph petechial hemorrhages. However, I don't know what is under the lower eyelid, and I don't know what is under the upper eyelid. The photograph of the left eye shows a few petechial hemorrhages on the sclera. There is a hemorrhage on the conjunctiva of the lower eyelid, but I cannot tell what is under the upper eyelid. So what I see on these photographs are that there are petechial hemorrhages in the left eye, and there are numerous petechial hemorrhages on the face.
On the face. And you described a minute ago about Dr. Peterson's autopsy that it occurred on the 28th, right?
Yes.
And so maybe these things had healed.
This is what happened, but he didn't see these hemorrhages anymore. Autopsy photographs show hemorrhages above the eyes. And
Let me stop you there. That's the supraorbital, right? Is that right?
Yes, because orbit is this oval opening in the skull, and supraorbital means that it's above orbit, so above eyebrow.
That petechiae and the orbital ridges around the eyes, the face, the neck, the arms and shoulders you described, that's also all consistent with chest compression as well, right?
It is consistent with chest compression as well.
Okay. So none of these things are specifically diagnostic for neck compression, true?
With one exception, with the exception of this linear contusion of the neck.
And you're saying linear contusion, correct?
Yes.
That's a scratch?
No, it's scratch is an abrasion.
Okay.
Contusion, it's a bruise.
All right.
So it's linear, so it's a line.
And you know from what you reviewed that there was a violent struggle going on between Mr. Acevedo and Mr. Mattioli in the house, right?
Yes.
So you can't say that that linear contusion came from a chokehold. You can't say that.
I would say that it came from compression to the neck.
Okay. Do you consider yourself an advocate, Dr. Tolomak?
I'm sorry?
Do you consider yourself an advocate for the state here?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Well, when you talked about Dr. Peterson and maybe he didn't see these things because his autopsy was delayed, he noted that he looked at the same photographs that you did, right? quote, examination of antemortem photographs received via email on April 22nd reveals robust petechial hemorrhages above the eyes, on the cheeks, and of the neck, right?
Well, this is what Dr. Peterson describes.
Right. So we did look at the same photographs you did, it seems.
I don't, I cannot answer this question. I don't know
Okay.
what he received and what he reviewed.
Okay. So you've also told us you looked at Mr. Acevedo's old medical records, but you can't decipher them because you're not a pulmonologist. So in terms of his lung function, that's left for an expert who knows what they're talking about in that respect.
Yes, I don't practice clinical medicine anymore.
All right. So let's talk about the anoxic encephalopathy. That is brain damage from lack of oxygen, correct?
Yes,
And lack of oxygen can occur because the person stops breathing first, right?
yes,
Or if someone is in cardiac arrest, there's also no oxygen going to the brain, correct?
that's correct.
And if someone's in cardiac arrest and there's no oxygen flowing to the brain, brain death can start to occur very quickly, correct?
Yes, so if the brain doesn't receive oxygen, the person can become unconscious in 10 seconds. The heart will be still beating, but the person will be unconscious.
And when the heart stops, or if the heart stops, and there's no oxygen flowing to the brain, again, brain death can start to occur in just a matter of a couple of minutes, right? 3 to 6 minutes?
It's usually, depending on the source, it's between 3 to 5 minutes. If the person stops breathing, the death may occur within 3 to 5 minutes.
Okay.
And the other thing is, it's like if the person stops breathing and the pressure, for example, is really, the person on their own will not restart breathing. They have to be resuscitated.
All right, so if we know, as you've testified already, that police arrived at
7:38.
and let's even say they turned Mr. Acevedo over at 7:40, okay? 7:38 to 7:40, and we know that the heart rhythm was restored at 8:01. That's 20 minutes right there, correct?
That's correct.
And so that would be a long enough time right there to cause the anoxic encephalopathy that you see, true?
Yes,
So it's possible that Mr. Acevedo's heart stopped beating, or he stopped breathing just before the police got there. That would still be consistent with his injuries that you see, true?
I'm sorry, could you repeat it?
Sure. You said that the 20 minutes from 7:40 to 8:01 with no oxygen going because Mr. Acevedo's heart is not beating, we know that, right?
Yes,
That period of time is sufficient deprivation of oxygen to the brain to cause injuries that you've noted, true?
that's correct.
All right, so if his heart stopped beating at 7:37 or 7:38, you would still see the same injuries that you saw now.
Yes, I will.
Okay. Now, asthma is the reduced flow of air right through the bronchi and the lungs, right?
No.
Well, it's increased,
I'm sorry, Mr. Powell, I'm just, deputies, we're not going to let anyone else into the courtroom. There are no seats available at this point. Thank you. Mr. Powell.
it's a reduced airflow rate at its end result, correct?
Well-
Air is not flowing freely because of different issues with the,
No, so there are different types of asthma. So asthma can be due to allergies, and in this case, it's called reactive airway disease, and it can be also caused by other conditions. What happens with asthma? There are some changes on the microscopic level in the lungs, and when there is asthma exacerbation, there's more mucus in the lungs, and then there is constriction of the bronchi and bronchioli that affect airflow, and the person have can have chest tightness, dyspnea, which is like difficulty breathing, and then they have like really bad cough.
And so it can make breathing more difficult at base, correct?
It will make breathing more difficult.
And asthma is often exacerbated by strenuous physical activity, true?
It depends on type of asthma the person has.
Okay. And using a controlled substance like cocaine can bring on asthma problems, correct?
Well, it can cause problems, but again, I don't practice clinical medicine.
Okay, so that's not really a question that you can answer. Somebody else maybe can.
Someone who practices pulmonology or specifically works with patients with asthma.
Okay. And so you talked about different pressures on the neck and weights, but as we look back at the body camera, you can't tell from looking at it exactly how much weight is on Mr. Acevedo's back, correct?
No, I cannot based on just looking at a video.
Right, because you don't know, even if you know how much Mr. Mattioli weighs, you don't know how much weight is on his left knee or on his right knee, etc. You don't know.
I cannot tell.
Correct. So someone down in a prone position that is lying on their stomach, as Mr. Acevedo was, can create some mechanical difficulties for breathing as well, right? The rise and fall of the chest, the expansion of the diaphragm, right?
So there were like multiple studies done, and based on forensic literature, because there was concern, especially with obese people, if they are placed face down on the ground, how does it affect their breathing? The breathing is like the process that is regulated by the brain, and in general, when the person inhales air, the ribs are moved up, and then also there are movements of diaphragm. So, one could argue if this prone position itself affects breathing.
Right, and so in this position, as you noted on the body camera, Mr. Acevedo's arms weren't held behind his back, correct?
So based on the body camera, when the first officer approached Mr. Mattioli and Mr. Acevedo, it's hard to see exactly what is the position. It's when Mr. Mattioli starts to move. I see position of his hands. I don't recall position of Joel Acevedo hands.
Okay, so as you've rendered your opinion and given us here today in court, you don't recall where Mr. Acevedo's arms were in the video, right?
I would have to rewatch video.
Okay. Is it your opinion, doctor, that Mr. Acevedo's, and he was obese, correct, based on the autopsy findings?
Yes.
So is it your opinion that well, let me do it this way. There are a variety of circumstances going on that morning in the kitchen, correct?
Yes.
There was, as you described, a violent struggle going on before
Yes.
the individuals got into the position they were in when the police arrived, correct?
That's correct. This is based on the statements in the police report.
Those statements are that Mr. Acevedo was a physical aggressor in the case, correct?
That's correct.
And that he was struggling with Mr. Mattioli, correct?
That's correct.
All right, and that, you would agree, sounds like severe or strenuous physical exertion, I would say.
Yes, I think that it was.
All right, and you would also agree that Mr. Acevedo had asthma, though it's not your specialty. You would agree that at least had that condition, and it makes breathing generally more difficult.
Yes, he had this condition.
And he also had the immune deficiency you've already described. That was going on as well, correct?
Yes.
And he was obese, which we just described, correct?
That's correct.
And he had some weight on his back as he was on the ground, correct?
That's correct.
Take the weight off the back out of the equation for a second, okay? is it your opinion that Mr. Acevedo's obesity, his asthma, his cocaine use played no role in his death?
Those conditions that you just mentioned, so his asthma, his obesity, cocaine use, made him more vulnerable in this situation.
Okay. More vulnerable than a healthy person.
Yes, the fact that there was this struggle before, in general, reduced his oxygen reservoir, so it made him more vulnerable. Again, with cocaine, as I said, there is evidence that he used cocaine. I don't make any statements that I cannot support, and I don't have any results showing that at the time of incident he had cocaine. I don't want to speculate.
So he testified that Mr. Acevedo's conditions made him more vulnerable to this bad result. And I want to ask you about your manner of death finding. You testified that that is, in your opinion, homicide. I just want to be clear. That's not a legal finding that you're making, correct?
No.
Not in any way, shape, or form.
No. This is from a medical point of view, and what I do when I determine the manner of death, I very often read National Association of Medical Examiners Guide to Determination of Manner of Death, and I use they call it but for statement. So I look at the whole case. I look at evidence in the cases of any traumatic violent death. I look at natural diseases. I looked at the trauma. I look at toxicology results, and I ask myself this question: but for would have happened, if, like for example, like but for in this case, this physical restraint, compression of the chest, compression of the neck, would have Joel Acevedo suffered cardiopulmonary arrest.
All right. But for, I'll strike that. So you're saying if Mr. Acevedo had just been laying on the floor on his own without attacking anybody, he would be okay?
I don't know if he would be okay, but it would be a different case.
Right. And you can't say, well, I'll strike that. That's all, Your Honor. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Tiffin?
No.
Thank you. Thank you, Doctor. You can step down.
Judge, at this time, the state's moving to evidence Exhibit 14, which is the toxicology report. And at this time, subject to rebuttal, the state's not calling any further witnesses and the state rests.
Thank you. Any objection to Exhibit 14?
No, Your Honor.
Exhibit 14 is received and marked. The state is rested. It's about 11:45, so I think this is a good time to break for lunch. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask you to come back. We're going to try and start a little early at 1:15, so please be back at 1:15. Leave your notebooks here. Again, you still can't talk about the case, though. And I have to remind you, save those discussions for deliberations. And we'll see you all at 1:15. All rise, please. Please take your seats. We had two sidebars. The first one was resolved on the record that involved Dr. Tolomak's testimony regarding versity. And did you want to address that any further, Mr. Tiffin?
No, I think we addressed it actually without the jury here, so.
Okay. And Mr. Hart, or Mr. Powell?
No, that's correct.
Okay. There was a second sidebar, and as gallery, as you're aware, that involved what we were seeing, which was some, I'll just call it misconduct in the gallery. If I see again any verbal expressions, any physical demonstrations, any sort of reaction to testimony, that person will be ordered to leave this courtroom and will not be allowed to return for the duration of the trial. I want to make sure everyone understands that. That goes for everyone. Now, I'm also going to ask the deputies to exercise a little more control over individuals entering the courtroom. If you see no seats available, don't let anyone in. It is time to end entry. We cannot have people standing in back, and that is not allowed. All right. Other issues, parties you want to address before lunch? Mr. Tiffin?
No.
Okay, or Mr. Hart? Mr. Howell?
I just want to complete the record on that issue. I had asked actually for the court to remove people from the gallery because that is not the first time that we've heard murmurs and outbursts, and it's entirely inappropriate. And I asked that the court deny my request to do so to the extent the court believes that Marcy's law would prohibit it from doing so. If it occurs again, I would say I disagree. That does not give anyone the right to disrupt court proceedings and Mr. Mattioli's right to a fair trial. And I will not hesitate to ask the court again. And my hope is that if it happens again, the court will not hesitate to remove people no matter who it is.
Right, and maintaining order in the courtroom is critical. It's critical for everyone's safety. And I just want to remind everyone of that, as well as preserving the right of all parties to be heard and the ability of the jury to focus on the testimony. And when you interrupt that flow, you are interrupting the ability of the jurors to hear and understand testimony. The court will not allow it. So I gave a warning at the beginning of these proceedings, and now I've given a much more explicit warning. It will not be tolerated. So folks, keep that in mind. We are going to break for lunch at this time. Court's in recess.